them do their jobs better every day. What we are in the midst of now is probably the biggest test we've had of our business continuity plans and planning to date. I've asked a few colleagues to join me in a discussion of the intersection of business continuity and this dreadful pandemic we're in the midst of. We'll be using a framework that talks about people, processes, and systems. I'm going to ask them to address the time frames of pre-COVID, currently what we're doing, and re-entry and what that might look like in terms of a blueprint for tomorrow's work. I'm also going to ask them to share their experience based on the size of organization they are, the scope of organizations' services, and the type of association they are. In terms of format, I'm going to ask each of them to do this in 5 minutes. And I'm looking at them right now because all of them are like me and a little long-winded. So I'm going to ask them to do that in terms of 5 minutes. Our panelists are Mark Golden, FA, ASAE, CAE, the Executive Director of the National Society of Professional Engineers. Welcome, Mark. John Sullivan, Chief Information Officer of the American Chemical Society. Mark Dorsey, FA, ASAE, CAE, Chief Executive Officer of the Construction Specifications Institute. Kara Freeman, MBA, PMP, CAE, Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the American Council on Education. Let me take a step back. John Sullivan, CAE, Chief Information Officer of the American Chemical Society. And so the format we'll use is I'll ask each one of them again to take 5 minutes to talk about talk about where we are in terms of the framework, and then we'll have Q&A. So is everybody okay with that format in terms of the panelists? We're all okay with that? Okay, let's start off with Kara Freeman. Kara, if you'll take the stage, and then we'll get to the other panelists in turn.
Sure, okay. As Reggie mentioned, I'm Kara Freeman. I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of American Council on Education. And for those who might not be familiar with ASAE, American Council on Education, we're the major coordinating body for the nation's colleges and universities. So we are a membership organization that mobilizes the higher ed community to shape effective public policy. We do advocacy work. And then we also foster innovative, high quality practice on our college campuses. And so we have about 1,700 members. And our members educate 2 out of every 3 students in all accredited degree granting institutions. And so from pre-corona where we were, or pre-crisis mode where we were, we have about 135 staff. We had a handful of staff who were fully remote, and we had some who worked remotely occasionally. We also had a virtual collaboration technology and multimedia team. So ASAE was well poised actually for this current situation, because we were already doing webinars and have a .edu podcast and video conferencing. And we had moved to Office 365, but we were not fully utilizing all of it because we had some staff who were not as fully on board as others in terms of using all of the technology. And so where we are from a right now perspective is it really became an opportunity for us to educate staff. Reggie mentioned people, processes, and systems, or if you look at people, processes, and tools that make up systems, the people and the processes part is where the opportunity came in terms of where we currently are. And so we educated staff who were not fully up to date on some of the functionality of things like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, or ensuring that they had things on a team site versus using shared drives and some of the technology that might be considered a little bit older. So again, it was opportunity in the crisis. We were able to dust off our continuing operations plan and ensure that everything functioned the way that it should when we saw back in February where things were headed. And it really became, anyone in IT, you're a problem solver if you're in IT. And so you wanted to figure out, what do we need to do from a technology perspective to assist our staff? I look at technology as the enabler. So what do we need to do? How do we need to use all the various tools we have to enable the work to continue? And the biggest hurdle for us was I think the first 10 days became mostly triage, where we had staff who had bandwidth issues at home, or maybe, oh, I have a computer, but my camera's not working. What do I need to do? So we were getting equipment, getting folks set up, and then to a point where we are now, where we're fully up and running and operational. Things are going actually very well. And again, I'm just excited about the opportunity in terms of staff being able to use the technology the way that we envisioned them using it, and using it in ways that we hadn't predicted as well. And that's part of, I think, what happens when you unleash technology and folks have needs that are in place. Did I stay under my 5 minutes, Reggie?
You absolutely did. And that'll leave more time for Q&A from the group, yeah. So I know they appreciate that. Mark Golden.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the National Society of Professional Engineers. We're an individual membership society that serves licensed professional engineers and focuses on their qualifications, also with a substantial certification function for engineering technicians. When COVID hit, we were at just getting into implementation of a complete restructuring of our business model and our approach to business, and had established a series of growth strategies largely built around having people out in the field visiting others. So that was a kind of an abrupt interruption of that. I will say I've been surprised, but pleasantly surprised at how quickly everyone in the organization adapted to well, it's obvious that's not going to work. What can we do? The technology systems and infrastructure here was, I wouldn't say, first class, but was reasonably current and reasonably up to date. And as Kara mentioned, I think this is not unusual. The real issue was the degree of interest and intensity that individual staff members were willing to invest in making use of the technology that was available to them. That's what changed overnight. When suddenly people were scattered around, Microsoft Teams was not sort of another distraction that that Mark was pushing, and it got to be something that worked really well, and people could see the impact of doing that, and they adjusted very quickly. The negative piece of this, I'm really pleased with the way the organization was able to respond, and I think we are learning things and achieving a level of nimbleness and agility that will serve us well post-COVID. But there was, this was also being done simultaneous to a pretty severe economic impact, where it's not, I know a lot of organizations had their meetings impacted. For us, it was an overnight total shutdown of certification revenues as testing centers closed. So I'm not sure exactly how it played into the dynamics, but we did some pretty significant layoffs. So it was a reduced workforce who were forced into a completely different operating environment, and managed to figure it out pretty darn quickly, which is always a really good thing. And that's sort of the piece I take out of it, which is sharing with the other panelists as we were waiting for people to come on, is that even if the speed and intensity of the current disruption, even once that is past, if half the associations are able to sustain half the speed we've been forced to adopt right now, the speed and nimbleness of the association community in general will be better than it was even before this. So that's
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. So let's go to Mr. Dorsey.
Reggie, thank you. And thanks for everyone for being on the call with us today. I'm really excited to talk about some of the adaptations at CSI. CSI is the Construction Specifications Institute. We're about 7,000 members, but about 3 times that are certificate holders through our certification programs. and we have about 20 times that in terms of the number of contacts in our database. Our members are those folks who basically ensure that a construction project is delivered correctly. We're the intersection between architects, engineers, contractors, building owners, and facilities managers. I'd characterize where we've been in terms of COVID as the intersection of a slow-moving natural disaster in concert with innovation that we had our eye on for some time. Half of our staff works remotely. We have a staff of 22. They're coast to coast. However, last December, we moved offices into a new space. We had already downsized space, and every office is set for hoteling, and such that any worker, if they want to, can come in and potentially use any workstation, to include my own, which I know scares a bunch of folks. We designed it that way so that we'd have the maximum flexibility for staff. So moving offsite once this hit was not such a big deal from a technology standpoint. We had moved to the cloud, taken advantage of O365. Though I will say that the shock has been probably more for those folks who have had to, who worked in the office 3-4 days a week, as opposed to not coming into the office at all. But in terms of learning, e-learning, credentialing, a focus on virtual communities, we'd already been down that path. And in fact, communities, online communities, were our single biggest growth area in the last 2 to 3 years. So availing ourselves of the existing technology was there. What we've had to do is accelerate a couple of changes. And just this coming week, we're putting in place an ability for remote proctoring, so that rather than going to a testing center, members will be able to take their exams from home under certain conditions. And so it's not so much now is the technology available, but more how are we adjusting so that we are adequately feeding the beast, the pipeline of information that folks are asking for, the knowledge that people come to expect from associations in the first place, and be able to engage virtually. So we've instituted a number of online discussion forums, peer-to-peer discussion forums, everything that you're seeing a number of associations do, just like ASAE in this forum, we're doing. Plus, we've reached out to a number of our supplier companies where we had gaps in information, and where some of those were previously sponsored. We reached out and offered for a limited period of time to produce even more content via our sites for free. Mainly to make the case to the membership and to our customer base that as we're working our way through COVID, we are here for them and here to enable their professional success while we're still trying to figure out what tomorrow is going to bring. I think the biggest challenge has been culturally. There's been more meetings, more time in each meeting is devoted to the first 10 or 15 minutes. Hey, how you doing under COVID? What's going on? It's been a challenge for folks to manage their time at home with both crushing bandwidth usage at your home, where it really wasn't designed for that kind of, your wireless system wasn't designed to be hammered that badly, combined with security issues, which we'll get into, and how do people deal with the numerous options, technological options in front of them, whether it's using Zoom, Teams, Skype for Business, whatever Fred just built last week, combined with, I think our staff was actually in a tough position to absorb all that anyway. I mean, just think how often Microsoft was uploading a new change to O365 every week, and it felt like the proverbial VHS back in the day. There's probably a lot more capacity to use these systems than we were realistically able to absorb. So the good news is, I think, as an organization, we were fairly well diversified in terms of income and our content strategy and member engagement. but we still have our challenges. We're fortunate to be in a place where we haven't had to cancel a very large meeting yet, or one that is so significant that we can recover from it yet, which has given space for the staff to breathe and think about what next, what programs do we need to accelerate, what things do we need to put a bit of a hold on. And so I guess the main thing is the technology. We were talking before coming into this. A lot of the technology has been with us for a while now, and I think I've been struck at how many organizations really didn't have some semblance of a business continuity plan or disaster plan in place. And I'm from Denver originally, actually from Alaska, originally moved to Denver. And now moving into a target city like the DC area, I was a little surprised. But by the same token, I've also been heartened and amazed by not only how many of our staff, but the staffs of our colleagues have been able to adapt quickly. And it seems like those folks that were focused on digital transformation, a lot of them have been able to accelerate a little more quickly. But it does point out that digital transformation always needs to be at the forefront of our strategic discussions. And when we get into the post-COVID era, there'll be a balance, certainly between face-to-face and what had been analog. I'll close by saying what we're trying to do is not have a knee-jerk reaction that causes us to abandon a media or a process so we inadvertently wind up doing more harm than good, just because ironically the bright shiny new object is virtual connectivity in ways that we hadn't really had to accelerate over the last few months.
Thank you, Mark. Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Reggie. John Sullivan, Chief Information Officer at the American Chemical Society. I think of the ACS in three parts. You've got your professional society, 150,000 PhD chemists. And then we have a journal publishing program, fifth largest scholarly publishing program in the world, just below the commercial providers. We produce over 50 journals in chemistry. And then we have a several $100 million chemical information business as well. And so while it might sound, and what I want to tell you from this area is that the technology to deliver your programs and services exists today in sufficient form that it's not the technology that's going to be a barrier to your continued success. It is how you implement that technology and how you deliver value from that technology to replace what you're not going to be able to do in the same fashion in whatever the new normal is for a while. And I actually think of right now as the new normal, and this is normal until it's not. And I would say from moving organizations off site, that's a fairly well understood process now. Organizations big and small largely have made that transition a little bit more smoothly than they thought. It's a good thing it happened now and not 3 or 4 years ago. We wouldn't have had the opportunity to participate, make this transition as easy as we can now. I would also say that I think of this in phases. You have the phase of the phase of moving off. You have the phase of sustaining operations while you're in place, and then you have the stage of returning operations in the future. And it's not too early to start thinking about the reentry program and delineating between the difference between an office being open and staff returning or a workforce returning to that office. And I think those are two different activities. I think the real question is, how do you identify the technologies that are going to drive your value proposition to your members? I'll stop there. I don't know if I'm still on because my video went down.
Don't worry about your video. We can still hear your wisdom, my friend. That's what's most important here. So I've got a series of questions, and I see a couple coming in through the Q&A, but I'm going to ask these couple of questions first. two things. One, what about governance right now? And I'll ask the CEOs to respond to that. We found ourselves leaving the office one Friday and having both a board meeting and a board strategic planning session scheduled for the next Friday. We got through it pretty well, quite honestly, but I'm asking you guys, what do you think about governance and how that might change right now and what that might look like in the future? Mark Golden, why don't I ask you to go first?
First, I'll take myself off mute. How about that? We had a little more time, more space than ASAE faced, which we really appreciated. But the interesting part of that discussion is, we are in many ways still a fairly old school professional society with a large House of Delegates and a very small board of directors. And the board had been meeting already more frequently virtually than face-to-face, but that House of Delegates meeting was kind of the untouchable third rail. There was no way we could involve 80 plus people and observers, and there was no way they could properly conduct what needed to be conducted absent a face-to-face meeting. And this is easy for me to say because we haven't actually done it, but we have plans in place to do that meeting virtually because we have to. And so suddenly all those objections are sort of more secondary. And my confidence level is extremely high that it will work very well, that as a functionality, it will work just great. We're investing time in preparing people who aren't used to using these tools to be, comfortable there. So it's not their first, the meeting won't be the first time they've been on a Zoom meeting. We're taking care of the personal aspects of that. We have not just taken the agenda that we would have conducted in a face-to-face meeting and try to do it virtually. We've broken it up into, we've restructured it around things like the fact that at a face-to-face meeting, regardless of where they're coming from, everybody has ended up in the same time zone. If you're doing this virtually, that's not the case. And our poor director, state representative from Hawaii, might be willing to do a meeting at 3 a.m. once in the week, but we can't expect him, a couple of days in the row to be doing that. The last thing I would say, and I think this is really important, is, as John said, the technology capacity to do this is there. I have no nervousness about the ability to actually perform the function. The economics of doing it that way are obvious. I mean, this is flying 80 people to a face-to-face meeting is hugely expensive. So the technology argument and the economic argument make it sort of like we should have been doing it this way all along. Right. But my point is, it's never just the technology. We have to look at, as Mark said, what are we losing in terms of personal interaction? But more importantly, how does that impact a lot of other things going on within the organization? The House of Delegates meeting was always an anchor point for our annual meeting, our big educational conference. It was a major source of the registrations that we sold to our annual conference. If you're no longer holding an HOD, what does that say about your big education conference and how is it going to impact that? So there's a lot to think about going through there. But actually, if you have a meeting, a function, a problem, the technology can address that problem. The bigger challenge is going to be how do we adjust sort of other programs and activities around it to what makes the most sense.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask this question. I don't want you guys to answer it yet, but I want you to be thinking about it before I go to Mark Dorsey. Because Mark, as you were talking, I was just thinking, how much more can we do if we remove the barriers of time and space and location from the work that we do. So save that one for later. But Mark Dorsey, what about governance from your perspective?
Well, I'm actually glad you raised time, space, barriers to location, life, the universe, everything. Because I think that's an important factor. I mean, Mark talked about the obvious gains in terms of time and being able to save travel costs. What our members are going to miss most and have already expressed is the human contact, but that's the meeting after the meeting. That's the informal time. And so I'll break it into two things. One is strategic issues, and the second is the board meetings themselves. First thing is I would encourage anybody who's got that concern, go into your state laws and governing docs to ensure what the rules of the road are in your state to be able to hold a meeting. I went through governance changes in my prior organization in 2008 and got pretty well schooled on the idea of as long as you have synchronous communication, you can functionally hold a meeting unless expressly prohibited. And contract law kind of speaks to that as well. So in that case, one of the things that we have been doing for the better part of a year and a half is we've been conducting Zoom briefings with our board. And that's an hour on the usual things that many of us see in board meetings, which are the show and tell. So what's the staff doing in marketing? What are the key initiatives around learning? Where are some strategic issues that are emerging in order to ask the board if we are directionally correct? Because that's really the way our governance model works. And then the board asks those questions or answers the questions of where are we headed in the big picture and delegate beyond that to us. As we're looking ahead to our next meeting, which was scheduled to be a face-to-face meeting in the DC area, looking ahead, we've already broken out the key things that we think will be more reporting out. Those will be held live with the board, but also we use our learning library then to place those in a section that are accessible only to the board members so that those that can't make that particular briefing meeting can go in and still see the presentation. That way we can focus this synchronous board meeting on business issues, which will break up into smaller chunks. We've still kept our day, but no chunk will be more than an hour to an hour and a half of time so that we get a substantial Zoom break built in. And we're able to do that under our governing policies and procedures. We'll have to adapt a bit in terms of our annual business meeting, which is scheduled for September, but that's largely an advisory meeting. And I guess, if I may, Reggie, just in terms of keeping the picture on strategy, when the president announced about right before St. Patty's weekend, the changes that they saw coming as a result of COVID, we lost half the people that were scheduled to come to Chicago for a face-to-face meeting. And we literally were pointing screens at each other so the entire group could engage with the facilitator via Zoom. It worked really well, but there's a couple lessons learned. It changes, and I think John would concur when we were talking about culture and staffing. It changes the skill set needed for the chair and for the facilitator. You have to be very intentional in terms of calling on people, giving people time to contribute, managing when people are stepping on each other. And unfortunately, you probably have to go to a little more formal process. We've managed to get rid of Roberts other than in an advisory capacity. But in terms of the board doing its business, I think this will be really, really good in a completely teleconference or video conference world up until the point where we'll need to be able to engage in a little more spontaneous problem solving, which I think is also true for our staffs, by the way. So I think what goes for the board also goes for our staffs.
Got it. So a couple of questions. First of all, I'm always amazed at the languages things that come into the language as a result of things. So Zoom break is a rule, is a verb now that everybody uses when they talk about their meetings. Kara and John, I'm going to ask this one. We have a question from one of the people in the audience. What would you do differently in your approach to business continuity now as it relates to technology and processes used to support the organization? And I'm going to add something to that. have your ideas about what you will or will not supply remote workers changed during this process?
I'll jump in on that one. In terms of what we would do or what I would do differently with our business continuity planning, I think the biggest thing, we focused again on systems and the technology that was necessary, but I really think from a staffing perspective, what type of additional or different staff might you need when you move to a mode of being fully remote for an extended period of time. So for example, our continuing operations plan has a 1 to 3 day, then if we're a week to 2 weeks, and then it goes further. And I think as you're, the situation we're in now, are there different types of staff or are there different types of skills that are necessary the longer you go out? So from my perspective, it was helpful. We have third parties who assist us from a network perspective, network monitoring perspective. But as we're into, as I mentioned, the whole video conferencing support, luckily we had a team in place, but as we do more and more meetings, we may look at it of we need additional support that we can pull in to be able to help us support some of these meetings. So I'd say I'd focus a little bit more on the staff side from a continuing operations perspective. And then Reggie, you mentioned what would we do differently? We've talked about this actually already, and we talked about this as a group of panelists as well. When you're in this virtual environment, you have folks who have just a laptop, for example. If you're looking at a small screen for a couple of weeks, that might work. You're looking at a small screen and you've got spreadsheets and things like that. We didn't have as part of our plan, even for folks who were fully remote already, to be able to have large monitors, for example. And so what we're doing even now is looking at what do we need to provide? What does that package look like? We call our standard package for a remote employee. Well, what will that look like going forward in terms of what type of, what they need on their side from a bandwidth perspective, but then what we need to provide or what we would provide from a technology or dollars perspective so that they could get the necessary hardware that they need on their side. So that's probably the biggest thing. But we actually, like I mentioned, are doing that even now because we don't know either how long this will last, and then also we know that there will be staff who end up being full-time remote who we had not planned on being full-time remote.
Absolutely. John?
Someone once asked Sam Walton when Walmart turned around, and he chose a decade. And so what I would say is just continue your investment in the infrastructure. Most of these organizations are in pretty good stead because you do have access to Zoom. You largely have VPNs and VDIs. If you don't know what those terms mean or you're struggling, then you need to talk to somebody like Kara or I. They're not difficult technologies to implement. So that would be the advice I would give organizations. And things that I would do differently is I would have attacked the document issue inside these older associations much earlier. We've had to do it because it was interfering with our ability to offer a community membership, a membership that doesn't actually cost anything. It was in violation of our documents. And it's there that we learned that there was a question about voting on the chat stream and how to handle that. And what I would say is the meetings that we talked about so far are the kind that are great for Zoom or these similar technologies, like executive leadership team meetings with 25 or fewer people. But when you get to those councils and the assemblies with 100 or 200 people, you're going to need the next level of support. And you can get it in a couple of ways. There are services that you can use, so you can kind of get a concierge service on a go-to webinar that will handle a lot of the polling and voting and the logistics for you. And there's a whole generation of software out there that largely is put together by firms that do stock shareholder meetings, because they have some very sophisticated governance rules for those meetings. And they come as close as there is to having a facilitated experience like one of our great big 500-person councils. But even they can't handle the nuances of the voting systems that some crazy scientists developed in the 1920s and codified in our bylaws. And so it's preventing our organization from using a very viable solution, and it has nothing to do with the technology. It has to do with people being stuck in the ways of their forebears. And the biggest thing we can do at this time, the biggest thing is this isn't going to be the last event like this that interrupts our work, it'll be something else next time. And this is a good opportunity for us to go and clean up our documents.
So let's stay there for a minute. And I'm going to ask our two CEOs to answer this question. You know, business continuity, whenever I hear people talk about business continuity, they turn first to the technology question. That's what they turn to. They don't talk about people and how people will react in different situations. You know, this isn't necessarily a disaster as we normally think of a disaster, but this is certainly disastrous enough. But so I want you to say a little bit about how you think you're managing people differently, or what your expectations are there. But then I also want to explore what John said. You know, what might we do differently in the future in terms of bylaws and governance policies and things of that nature to kind of modernize our organizations, I guess. So Mark Golden, I'll start with you.
Sure, and I think there are probably a lot of CEOs who are on this call who, if we were honest, would say the main thing we would do differently in terms of planning continuity is be more intentional about it. I think a lot of us, you know, I wouldn't want to say we got lucky, but you know, there are just a lot of things, none of them sort of major. There are a lot of things that would have been easy to have worked out before if we just thought about it. So I think, you know, having been nicked once, we're going to be better prepared going forward. But to your question, Reggie, I think there is a lot of I had one of my members who sort of pointed out that the biggest thing she has seen that's changed about the nature of conversations with staff and volunteers is professionals won't automatically hug anymore when they meet at meetings, and she thought that was a good thing. But that they're sort of paradoxically, I find myself communicating with staff a whole lot more frequently and informally. You know, I think there is that. We talk a lot within my senior management team about sort of people are connected at a certain level, but you know, how do we keep on top of sort of we had a couple of staff members. We created a little the break room in the building is called George's Cafe. And so we created a Microsoft team called George's Cafe, and we're pushing all, you know, just inspirational quote of the day. Here's a recipe. As things come up, you know, a lot of the staff who have sort of children have evidently this week was sort of when the being cooped up with spouse and children kind of reached a boiling point for a lot of them. And that kind of comes up in a humorous and helpful way. We've done some contests and things. So it's, that is not a natural communication style for me, at least. And so you just have to be aware and push it. On the governance side, you know, I think this is a way to, I think, overcome a fundamental challenge we've had, which is we've all recognized that meetings strictly governed by Robert's rules were kind of stifling, but we've preserved it. I think doing virtual meetings like this, virtual governance meetings, allows you to sort of reassert the kind of just basic management and control functions that Roberts was designed to serve originally. I saw a comment come up, one of the questioners. It's not so much about who seconded the motion. You still need to be able to sort of control the conversation and be sure people are recognized and allowed to speak. But in many ways, that's easier to do on a tool like this than it is when you're in the room. So, you know, how do you get to the outcome you achieved through Roberts, but in a somewhat less legalistic approach.
Got it.
Hey, Reggie, I hate to jump in here, but I want to push back a little bit on the whole concept of continuity planning at this moment. I mean, a lot of these organizations are struggling. I mean, to me, I would not distract your volunteer leaders with any discussion in the next 6 months about continuity planning. I would focus on staying afloat and getting your revenue streams back, and put this on the agenda for 18 months or 2 years from now. And because each of our situations will be very much different at the point in time when we can begin to act on it.
Absolutely.
My thoughts.
We're in it right now. so if we don't have it, we can certainly wait a little bit longer while we right shift our organizations again. Mark Dorsey.
Well, there's a yes and in that. Yes to just about everything Mark said, because we tend to over rely on Roberts anyway, to the point where the mythology of it is that it's a legal construct we have to follow. And I figure if the British Parliament can figure out how to have somewhat virtualized meetings, the rest of us can too. I think the main thing that what COVID does is it basically cuts through the fear of change, because we have no choice but to adapt. I mean, I'm hearing from architecture firms, from other design firms that felt like you had to be there. I only knew you were working if I could see you. That's how I can address your billable hours. And yet all of a sudden, voila, and we were thinking about virtualizing or remote work maybe 5 years from now, because we just require so much horsepower at our workstations, and overnight by their standards, literally, they've had to change. So I think John's point is well taken. What the challenge is in this environment is we have to be paradoxically intentionally spontaneous. We have to be very intentional about reaching out and connecting and or facilitating, because for students of human communication, the Allen curve suggests that your problem solving is better when you are in physical proximity to each other and to your team, and that's just how we're wired. And so I think it takes a lot of intentionality to overcome that. If I had something to change right now, I'd look at succession planning or business continuity as something we should have been doing anyway. So if you're just now deciding to do it now, to John's point, I wouldn't just add that to the plate. You probably got enough to worry about. But on the other hand, one of the things that I ask of our staff, and that I think you need to be focused on still, is do you understand and have you documented your business processes adequately? Because by the way, when you're doing this in a technical world, that's your warts are going to get shown immediately. And when I speak with IT and our staff, it's if you can't document it on a piece of paper, you sure can't create a requirement for IT to respond to.
Right.
So what we're having to be is a little more adept at identifying early when something is about to break or there's a service gap, and pay attention to that more quickly, because everything is being funneled much more strongly through technology and through those distribution methods. So, and then the last point I think I would mention is talk to your counsel again about how far you can push it. And I really appreciate John raising the point about different tools to facilitate communication. We've been using a tool called BoardPack for 3 years just to kill paper. And our board loves it because it makes it easier to structure the meeting. It forces you to be intentional about the motions, and a lot of the time that's wasted in terms of, hey, who wants to wordsmith the motion on the fly with smaller groups, that goes away really quickly. So intentionality, planning, that's at a premium. That's brought into sharper focus, not only now, but post-COVID.
Okay. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here, but they're going to all be centered around digital transformation. And I hate to use the buzzwords, but doggone it, every time I do, everybody knows what I'm talking about. So let's call it that right now. But a lot of organizations were in the midst of rethinking, if you will, their infrastructures and their organizations to better have them prepared for the digital future that really isn't the future, because we're right here, right now, quite honestly. But you know, Kara, John, from what you're thinking about in terms of your future. Anything changing now based on lessons learned through this process right now? John, I'll start with you.
Kara, you look like you were ready to go. If you're ready to
Okay.
go, I'll follow you.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, what we were doing from a digital transformation perspective, I mentioned from an internal infrastructure, we were good, we were solid. From digital transformation, what we were doing as an organization was looking at how we would have our members be able to deliver a lot of our services in a digital format. So, ASAE is a convener at our core, and a lot of our programs, for example, were all delivered. You go to a hotel and there's learning that takes place and you go back to your campus. And so we had actually already started with a platform in place that was going to be our digital learning platform. ASAE Engage is the name of it. And so ASAE Engage was already there, already in place, our digital learning platform. And what we've done now is, again, where there's crisis, there's always opportunity somewhere around crisis, is that ASAE Engage has become an online environment for groups within the higher ed community to get together, discuss what they're doing on their different campuses. It's become a place for ASAE to share content about what's happening, whether it is what's happening with Congress as it relates to higher ed or the stimulus packages, or a place for affinity groups to get together, if deans from various campuses could get together. And so really it has allowed our members to determine the direction that we were taking. But to get to John's point, I agree 100% with John. The tools are there. It was a tool that we were using for one thing, and we still are using it from a learning and content perspective. But based on the needs of our members, we're using it for something completely different. And so, it's just another example of being ready and going to the whole Wayne Gretzky model of going to where the puck is headed. So that's what's happened from a digital transformation.
Thank you. Hey, Kara, thank you for taking that first, because I think Reggie knows this, is that I kind of have an issue with the whole concept of a digital strategy. The ACS is highly digital.
Can I say that I agree with you? Yeah. The term digital strategy, digital transformation.
Yeah, so we are a highly digitized and electronic organization. Over 90% of our revenue comes because of e-products. It's over, we're $570 million. And I would tell you that we do not have a digital strategy. What we have is we have a membership strategy, and we have a membership 2.0 strategy, and we have a lot of technology roadmaps that support that. And we have a lot of technology architecture that supports it. I do not differentiate in my conversations with the executives at the ACS the difference between digital, IT, or business strategy. It confuses things. It's all one team trying to accomplish something. And if people can use digital strategy as a rallying point to have the discussion within their organizations, I don't object to it. But to try to set it aside from the rest of what's happening in the organization is foolish. It won't work. It will fail. Period.
Yeah, and I have to, if you don't mind, Reggie, to just jump on a point that John made. I think he's absolutely correct that it can't be separate. It explains why, I didn't say at the beginning, I was ASAE's Chief Information Officer for 10 years. I'm now ASAE's Chief Operating Officer, because it's all together. It is what our business strategy is. What are we delivering to our members? What do our members need, and how are we going to go about doing that? And that goes across the entire organization. It's not, here's what we're doing over here from a digital perspective, and we're doing something different in another part of the organization. So I'm 100% with you. It's about what you're delivering.
If our industry had been thinking about this properly, we would not be at a stage right now where we're worried about how to obtain value from hybrid events, because we would have been doing that as a natural course of evolving the way we deliver content, instead of a reaction to a pandemic that had been predicted for many years. And I'm not suggesting that we go back and redo things. It's why I'm not huge on the whole notion of pausing for continuity planning. We're too busy thinking about the next 48 hours and the next 6 months right now. And we just have to get these organizations there with the value proposition and a motivated volunteer base that will carry these missions forward in whatever the new normal looks like for your organization. And it's going to be very different and exciting for some. It's going to be very different and difficult for others. And just as a community, I'm really thankful to be part of venues like this where I can learn from others, because everything that I'm contributing here is something that somebody has given me at some point in the past. And I get so much out of these conversations that I'm looking forward to participating in some of these as a member of the audience.
Good. So I got a couple of, Mark Golden, you had something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say very quickly, I mean, part of this is we had to talk about it as digital transformation because we were sending rockets up to try to get people to pay attention to technology and the process behind it and how it would affect our processes. Sort of the silver lining to a pandemic is nobody's thinking about it that way now. It's all of a sudden we were in an environment where we had to figure out how to do meetings. We had to figure out how to do, governance. And I hope when the intensity and urgency of a pandemic environment passes, we will be able to preserve that sort of sense of this is all about process and outcomes, and technology is woven into that. It's not this sort of separate parallel path.
So we've got 8 official minutes left. We may run over a little bit if panelists have time, but I want to respect what we have in the audience as well. So there's one question here that's a very, I don't know if we can answer it or not, but I'll at least ask it because it came from the audience. Is that has any of the panelists considered how social distancing will be implemented when staff return back to the office, or do they think implementing such a plan is necessary?
Yes, we have begun to consider it. I can tell you that I'm on a CIO group for organizations with $100 million of revenue or greater in the DMV area. And there's about 30 of us, and we've been meeting weekly. And yeah, people are preparing. They are generally not expecting like temperature guidance to be required, but they're expecting that like health checks at the entrances to be expected. We've already decided that the term opening the office and return of the workforce are 2 very separate discussions. And we already know that we're not going to allow visitors when we first open up. We already know that we're not going to allow very many staff in. We're working through the procedures of 1 or 2 persons per elevator. And what does that mean to the stairs? So we're doing a lot of things like that. And there are some fairly inexpensive in the $3,000 to $5,000 range of kind of temperature checks for when you come into a building, and where your security guards or nobody has to touch them. And so you'll see, so there's technologies like that we'll put in place. We're going to have to rearrange workspaces for agile teams that are closer than 6 feet. We're going to have to install glass barriers for people in cubicles who are too close to one another. So there's a lot of things we're going to have to do to the environment. And then we're already thinking about, well, what happens if somebody in the environment demonstrates signals? So it's a great topic. It's not too early to talk about it. And there's a lot there.
Got it. Anybody
Reggie,
else?
I think from our standpoint, we're going to be very, very conservative because, frankly, we've taken this opportunity. I mentioned we moved last December. Like any good construction project, we were late and over budget. And we had 60 days where we weren't working in the office. So we've twice proved that we can deliver member value without physically having to be present. So really now this is in service of which teams want to find time to be together face to face. So we're going to be very conservative, following a lot of the topic areas that John mentioned, because we're a fairly small staff. And if I may, when we were talking about the transformation issue, it just kills me that business schools, even in systems classes, would have the business side and the IT side. This conversation has proven that we're all talking about strategy. We're all talking about how to deal with changes in the environment. And whether you're in the IT department, for the lack of, or any other department, you should not give in to anything that enables you or enables your group to function in a siloed way, because that is not going to set you up for success in the long run. Just had to slip that one in.
Got it. So I should mention to the audience as well, sometime in the next couple of weeks, we're going to do a webinar on what return to work looks like and things that people should consider. You know, I might grab John and see if he can help me think through what some of that looks like. He'll help us think through what some of that looks like as we go through this. I had another question.
Can I
Yep.
add really quickly to that last question? You know, I mentioned before, ASAE owns the building that we're in, so I'm actually, another part of my job is to be landlord. And so all the points that John mentioned are things that we're looking at in terms of re-entering the building. And it also gets to the point of working with human resources on what types of jobs can actually be fully remote jobs, so that we may not need the amount of space that we currently occupy in the building. What does that look like? And how do you determine what jobs can be performed fully remotely? What jobs might you need to have on site? So human resources becomes a part of this discussion as well.
John?
Right, and talk about acting with intention, right? What is the intention when you open up these offices? If you bring back 10% of the staff, are you more or less efficient than when everybody's in one location or the other? I think that this notion that we're just going to go ahead and return is something that needs to be challenged in every organization. And you need to think about whether or not it just doesn't make sense to stay remote for a much longer period of time, so that when you do return, you can return with more confidence and more people.
You know, I'll even add to that, John. I think we have a unique opportunity right now to rethink work. We really do. To look across the organization and give the good old, if I was starting this from scratch, what might it look like? You know, what might jobs look like? What jobs might be remote? How many things have we done internally that if outsourced would be done more effectively? I'm almost ready to stop using the term infrastructure, because I don't have much of that anymore. I got infrastructure. So if you consider that, you know, what does
but I don't like hearing anything where you say you're going to evaluate all positions. I view this as incremental. You got to make the decision for tomorrow for the next person, and then move on to the next decision. You know, it's not, you know,
I'm not saying you need to do it all at one time.
I just don't want all my HR colleagues that might be on here to think that this is a great opportunity to implement a new career framework.
That's not what I'm talking about. That's not what I'm talking about.
No offense, anybody.
We got 2 minutes left. I'm going to ask us, because we're going to run over a little bit, but real succinctly, if you will, your best wisdom as to what people should be doing right now, and because this is pointed toward a technology discussion, but a business discussion at the same time. You know, what 2 or 3 things might you tell people to consider right now as they move forward to try to get through the rest of this pandemic? Let me start with you, Mr. Golden.
Sure. I mean, I would say, stealing from John, I mean, his point is very well taken. If you're going to try to solve all the big questions that have been thrust in front of us, you're going to be paralyzed. So, you know, be aware going forward, adjust day to day, identify what you can fix, and what's most important. The other and secondary thing, which I keep coming back to again and again and again in conversations I have, is at the moment you are solving the challenge or intention of one activity, think about and be sure you are asking others in the organization how your decision and your change in this process or this program might impact other things that you're just not focused on right now. You know, so you don't. We're working in isolation, but that doesn't take away the need for my governance people to understand the impact on the continuing education people, understanding the impact on the committee people and the volunteers involved therein.
Cool. Kara? Hey, Karen, your mic is off.
Did I make that rookie mistake? Okay. Thanks. So it happens to all of us. So what I'd say is stick to IT basics. And by that, I mean, from a technology perspective, focus on the what. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And the tools will help you figure out how. Technology, again, is the enabler. So I'd say stick to that, figure out the what, let the technology tell you how. And then the other thing I would say to focus on is to look at, and we've talked about this earlier, the various processes. If there's documentation that currently needs to be developed, take a look at that, look at the processes that are needed for the work that you're doing. Now is the time to get those things in order. And also use this time to figure out next steps. John brought up roadmaps, and Reggie has heard me say this a lot as it relates to what we do at ASAE. We have a rolling technology roadmap, and it changes, and it's a living document. And as you can imagine, it's changed a lot here in the last several weeks, but it provides us with, here's where we're headed from a technology perspective, and take a look at that and see what may need to change in your organization based on what's currently happening. And then the last thing I would say in terms of just something that's very bottom line, there will be, we'll look at if folks are coming back, what folks are coming back, if everyone's going to stay remote, but to take a look at the proper backups that you have in place, just a basic foundation from an IT perspective. And I don't just mean backups in terms of data, I mean backups in terms of your internet providers and things like that, so that should you run into issues, you do have backups. There was I'm reminded there was an internet service provider that had a big issue in DC yesterday that caused a lot of people problems. We have backups. We had no problem. Some of them pat self on the back, actually pat our network infrastructure team on the back with that. But that's just something that's bottom line ground level to have in place. But if you don't have backups, that's important.
All right. Hey, Mark.
Yes, sir. So I'd just say it's culture and people. That this pandemic really will shine a light on your management mindset. I've asserted for as long as anyone will listen to me that resistance to working remotely or working from home or working flexibly has been nothing more than a management mindset, not a technological limitation, at least within the last several years. View technology as a facilitator of information, data, communication, as opposed to a thing in and of itself. And that way, to John's earlier point, I think you wind up viewing that technology as truly integrated and part of any strategic conversation, which brings me to be intentional. We're going to have to be more intentional. And picking up on Kara's point, that means product roadmaps, that means assessing your business processes, and frankly, building enough room to be flexible so that you can adapt when one of those things breaks, because they will, and that you always have a plan B and C and D. And some of this may feel like you're trying to change the wheels on the F1 car as it's moving at 200 miles an hour. I'm sure my team feels the same way as well. But if you do it a bit at a time, you'll be able to knock this out, all in the interest of serving the mission and the member.
Mr. Sullivan.
My advice is, our parents never promised us a straight line. Don't believe that this is going to return to normal. Don't believe that your power to convene people and bring them together in physical spaces is going to sustain the value proposition of your organizations in the future. Use this time not to regroup and try to reinvent the past. Use this as an opportunity to disrupt the approach of delivering value and find ways that you can sustain value in the future, even if it's at a lower revenue target. Go ahead, adjust your organizations now, and begin that growth process again with energy and vigor, and not from a defensive posture.
Thank you. So what I will end with, first of all, is it's really good to have smart friends. Thank you guys for joining us on this panel for sure. And we'll look forward to us having these conversations additionally in the future. And again, in the 2 weeks, we will be having a webinar similar to this that talks about reentering the workplace. We do these webinars once a week now to make sure we keep talking about the issues that are important to us. So thank you so much, guys, for taking time out to do this with us, okay?
Thank you, Reggie.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for having
Mark, Kara, great to see you guys.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just for the remaining attendees, you should know that this is part of a weekly series that we do. Next Friday's conversation will be unique considerations for small staff associations. And then on Tuesday, May 5th, we'll be doing a webcast on moving from triage to modeling a future for your association. And with that, we're officially done. Thanks everybody for participating.